All right. All right, good evening, everybody. My name's Chris. I'm from So Quiet, one of the founders here. And we've been wanting to do this particular presentation for a long time and this topic. So we'll go over that in a second. A few quick housekeeping things before we introduce our guests. This is, of course, a live event. We try to make it as misophonia friendly as possible. Myself and all of our guests experience misophonia, so we will try to keep triggers to a minimum. But if something happens, feel free to throw it in chat. I think you all can use chat the way this is set up. If not, you can put it in Q&A, which is being monitored as well. We'll try to keep our mics off when we're not speaking, just in case that anything like that happens. So a couple of the things, I believe you all also probably have the ability to turn on closed captioning for yourself. Again, I'm not sure what the audience is seeing. There might be a closed captioning button at the bottom of your window. It's like a little square that says CC. You should be able to turn that on and have live generated captions of what's being said. Sometimes this can be handy if there's some noise or something, that is frustrating or what have you. You can turn on closed captioning and read what is being said pretty accurately instead of leaving or missing out. Before we dive in, we'll try to post links to relevant topics as they come up in chat as well. But let me also state that this is being recorded. So we will be posting the recording of this for future viewing, if you like, as well, at some point in the near future, next few days, depending on if there's any editing that needs to happen. So with that being said, let me go ahead and hand it over to our guests. Again, I'm Cris Edwards, and here with us as well is Dr. Jennifer Brout. You want to introduce yourself, Jennifer?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jennifer Brout, and first and most important, I have misophonia, and I also have raised a child who is now an adult. She's 31 with misophonia, so way before it had its name, I was trying to fund research with a small family foundation that I had, and I, along with Dr. Rosenthal, founded the Duke Misophonia and at the time sensory processing and emotion regulation program, which is now the Misophonia and Emotion Regulation Program. I founded the Misophonia Research Network, which is a great lead-in to Dr. Heather Hansen, who has taken over that network for me. And I also do a lot of clinical work, helping mostly children and parents who are experiencing misophonia.
That's right. Thank you so much, Dr. Brout, for being here. Dr. Heather Hansen, who is titled as Misophonia Research Network. We're trying to figure out how to change that, but go ahead and introduce yourself, Dr.
Yeah,
Hansen.
in case you forget why I'm here, that is the title. But as Jennifer said, I took it over from her, so that is a title I'm honored to have. My name is Dr. Heather Hansen. I also have misophonia, first and foremost. I have built my research career thus far on researching misophonia. So I am right now just starting as an assistant professor at William & Mary, starting my own misophonia research lab, which I'm pretty excited about. But I have a background in researching misophonia from cognitive perspectives, from social perspectives, and from neuroimaging perspectives as well. And so I have definitely a deep passion in making sure that the information we present to the public is as accurate and scientifically valid as possible.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you all could be here. This is, like I said, something we've all talked about doing as far as a topic for quite a while, but lately just the awareness of misophonia and its coverage in the press and other places has caused us to want to go ahead and finally do it. So the topic that we're going to talk about is information literacy in the Misosphere. And this is going to be a free-form conversation, so who knows what we're going to end up covering. But starting out, it was sort of spurred on by a particular article that came out in the Daily Mail, which is a UK newspaper, a while back. You've probably seen plenty of things like this pop up from time to time in the news. This one happened to have the title of "Scientists Think They Found a Cure for Misophonia." That sounds pretty interesting. Do you have this brain disorder? And this caused quite a bit of confusion for our community. I got a lot of emails. I'm sure my guests did as well, or people asking about it. And so we ended up talking quite a bit about it. I ended up writing a blog article that sort of outlines why would they say this and is it true? And it's kind of the topic of what we're talking about. there's a link that Michelle posted to the actual article we're talking about. So let's open it up. Let's start just with this as our beginning place, this particular article. I'm not showing the actual Daily Mail one because it's behind a paywall. So I'm showing a reposted version of it, which is something we're going to talk about, getting around paywalls. But so Dr. Hansen, Dr. Brout, you saw this headline, which is not an unusual kind of a headline as far as sounding kind of sensationalistic and extraordinary. What was your initial approach when this appeared, and what kinds of things did you do at the beginning before we get into how did we analyze this and determine if it's true or not?
I'll say that it is frustrating to see titles like this. I have seen it throughout, my career so far. And I think it's helpful to keep in mind that these are titles that are written by folks whose job is journalism and folks whose job is not science necessarily. And it does not necessarily reflect what the science is saying. And oftentimes, being someone who has also been interviewed for journal articles, I've experienced where a journalist might say like, oh, that was a very technical way that you said it. What if we make it a little snazzier for the public to understand? And I've gone back and forth with headlines to be like, how can I title this from the journalist perspective to get the most, clicks on their article? Whereas I am like, no, make it as dry and, realistic as possible, because that's what science says. So it's a tough thing to balance because we have different goals from research and scientists as journalists do.
That's exactly right. Dr. Brout, do you have anything to add? And we have some slides that will walk us through how did we take this headline and kind of analyze why it said that. Is it true? Is it not? Why would they, is it somewhere in the middle? But before we dive in, Dr. Brout, you've been handling misophonia and related things for decades.
Yeah.
These kind of headlines are not unusual. What is your initial thought when you see these pop up?
I mean, I cringe every time, to be honest, because not only is it sensationalism, but one of the other issues that we are dealing with now is the fact that we don't really have science journalists anymore. So it used to be 30 years ago, you had science journalists. So now there are a few, I'm sure, but anyone can be writing these articles. So that makes it even more confusing. And this title, it gives people false hope, the cure for misophonia, and also, do you have the brain disorder? That it's just a very upsetting question, the way that it's put. It was just everything about it made me cringe.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and go through some of the slides. This is sort of an outline that Michelle helped put together of the article that I wrote. Not that my article is special, but it does kind of walk us through the process of assessing these kinds of claims. And the first thing is, I love this quote. I think about it often from Carl Sagan: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I use this as a mantra for myself in many aspects of life, not just when it comes to headlines about misophonia, that, yeah, something is too good to be true. Typically it is. But as we're evaluating this, if you're just scrolling through your emails or you're scrolling through social media, you might see something like this pop up. This was shared quite a bit on social media, that misophonia has a cure now that scientists have found. And you might think, what does that mean? How do we evaluate that? And it really doesn't take a whole lot of time to get used to being skeptical of these sort of extraordinary claims. And you might think, oh, I don't want to have to go research this. It's going to take forever. I don't want to, have to do all of that. But it doesn't take more than a few minutes to go through and figure out whether or not this is actually true. And one of the places to start is to actually read the article. And our stage manager, Michelle, my wife, is the librarian, and she teaches courses in information literacy, which is assessing the claims for things that are out there, regardless of what they're about. And how do you understand if headlines or social media posts that sound really incredible are true or not? And she shared this particular way of breaking things down, this super simple process called the SIFT method that was created by Mike Caulfield. And it starts with just stop. The first place is the stop. You see an incredible headline that says, scientists think they've found the cure for misophonia. Do you have this brain disorder? Instead of just accepting it at face value, just stop and think, does that seem plausible? So I'll go to our guests. We know a lot about misophonia at this point. Active research has been going on for probably 5 or 6 years. Legitimate research, probably 10 or so, right? And so what do we know about misophonia that might make people, or what do we not know about misophonia that might make people sort of question that headline right it off the bat, just that one sentence about finding a cure? Why does that seem kind of implausible based off what we do or do not know, in your opinion?
I think that when I think of a cure, I think of complete, all of the symptoms of a disease or a disorder are ameliorated, or they're gone. Let's put it that way. And I think when we're talking about misophonia, it's more likely that what we're trying to develop is a treatment. And a treatment is very different from a cure, which is something we have all talked about. So when I see the first thing I see is cure, and that is a red flag to me.
Right, exactly. Heather, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jennifer. And it's one thing to kind of keep context in mind that although misophonia has been around in concept for a while, it wasn't until literally 3 years ago, 2022, that we had our first definition of what misophonia actually is. And so still to this day, there's no official diagnostic criteria. There's no official assessment scale to use. We're still so not behind, but we're still at the basic steps here of trying to figure out what misophonia is, how it manifests. We're just starting to get studies in childhood and development. We're just starting to get studies across non-US or kind of Canadian populations. So I agree with Jennifer. Given where we are at now, there is no way we can make a claim about we have cured it if we don't even know what it looks like in everyone so far.
Absolutely. And I'll mention that we have 2 professional researchers here, people who've been working in science for their entire professional careers. I am a theater person, so I play the role of the average public who's not a scientist. And so when I see this, I might be witnessing different conflicting things about misophonia online. If you frequent online groups, online subreddits or anything like that, or communities about misophonia, you'll see a lot of conflicting information about what misophonia is or is not. But even I know that we don't know exactly what misophonia is. We don't know what causes it, or if it starts at birth, or if it develops later on. We know that it doesn't fit into an easy bucket of, oh, it's strictly psychological or it's strictly neurological. It's kind of a combination of a bunch of different things. And so it's just a person in the general public who tries to keep up with these things and understand them, because I also have misophonia. I just want to know what we know and what we don't know. That is a pretty outlandish claim that we have a cure for something that really, like our guests have said, has only been researched in earnest 4 or 5 years. And that is picking up, thankfully, but we're not there yet. Okay, the second part of the SIFT method is investigating. So that's the I. Where do you start? Again, this doesn't take a whole lot of time. This might be something that you look at and go, I don't have the time to research everything I read. Once you get used to this can happen in just a few minutes with a few quick Google searches. So the first thing to start is, what is this publication like where this particular headline appears? It's the Daily Mail. I honestly didn't know much about the Daily Mail. It's a UK publication, a newspaper. Some people from the UK have commented and said everybody in the UK knows that that's not an entirely trustworthy source. I did not know that as an American. But when you're looking at these sorts of things yourselves, Jennifer and Heather, when you're assessing media as you come across it in the world and we're bombarded with it, what sorts of things are you apt to do right off the bat if you're seeing whether it's related to misophonia or not, something that sounds pretty fascinating or interesting, and you're not sure if the source is trustworthy? What are some things that you do? And then we'll get into some tools that anybody can use to do that.
I think I would start by visiting their broader website. I would open up to their homepage and I would get a sense of what style of articles that website publishes. And I typically will trust sources that will have like a science section or a section that says a byline, this article was double checked by this doctor, this researcher, or whoever. So I would check that they have editors proofreading their articles. I would check that the other articles they publish are ones that seem reputable or not sensationalized. And I think as a whole, if you approach their site and all of it is like gossipy, celebrity, kind of trying to get you to click their article, I would not trust it as much. And side note, Chris, I just wanted to add, I likewise have not been super familiar with the Daily Mail, other than searching. Apparently, it's got a nickname of Daily Fail. So that's apparently an indication of how much the UK folks trust it.
Well, even just finding that there is a common term that is sort of cheeky like that, it helps you understand it, that there are enough people who think that maybe this isn't quite the most trustworthy of sources. But Dr. Brout, anything else that you can think of? There's a few things that are part of the SIFT method we'll go through that you can, but Heather's covered some already. Anything that comes off as something that would be a big tip off that it is or is not trustworthy to you?
The title, first of all, was a tip off, I think. And I love what Heather said about looking at the website and seeing, if this was written by a science journalist, or was it at least reviewed by a doctor or something like that. So I think beyond that, we have to be more careful than ever, because as we were talking about, we're not as familiar with the UK as the UK is with the UK. We're more familiar with US, or we have a lot of publications in Canada coming, just right to our computers, our phones all the time. So we do have to really, I think, proceed with caution more than ever.
Absolutely. Those are all great points. So Heather, you're absolutely correct. What other things does this newspaper cover? You can just look at their homepage and instantly know in a couple of seconds. Is it celebrity gossip? Is it very sketchy claims about miracle cures for other things, or just things that seem like they're sensationalistic or superficial? Absolutely. See what other people have to say. There's actually websites that you can go to. One is allsides.com. There are others that just try to rank any kind of news publication on if it's biased towards a particular viewpoint, if it is trustworthy. Some other things to look for that Dr. Brout mentioned are, do they have editorial standards? A lot of very reputable newspapers and publications will have a page on their website that says what their editorial standards are, how they avoid conflicts of interest so that their journalists aren't perhaps being biased in their coverage because of some advertiser money or something. That can be a challenge. And so you can look at those kinds of things. All Sides is one. There's others. There's media bias and fact-checking sites. And you can also just do a quick Google of, take the name of the publication, in this case, the Daily Mail from the UK, and ask Google, is it reputable? Is it biased? Is it trustworthy? And see what kind of things you find. I happen to have done that on this particular article because I didn't know much about the Daily Mail. I came across a Wikipedia discussion. Now, Wikipedia, of course, has editorial standards. It's a crowdsourced thing that has become much more reliable than it has in the past, and has done a really excellent job of having perhaps tens of thousands of volunteers keep this thing pretty trustworthy. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. But I came across a Wikipedia discussion saying that they didn't necessarily think that the Daily Mail should be used as a source because it is not reputable. It doesn't have a reputation in their view of being fact-based, of presenting things from an unbiased, factual standpoint. So you can kind of decide based off of these various things that you can find looking to see if this is reputable on whether you think it should be or not. See if there's anything else I'm not thinking of. Yeah, look for editorial standards on their page. Also, see if they cite other sources. This is actually a good one. Yeah. Any kind of newspaper will cite their sources. And if they're making claims about something and not saying where they got that information from, or not saying that they got it from a reputable source or a professional expert, that might be something to make you kind of scratch your chin. The use of overly dramatic language, I think we talked about this a little bit before we move on, but where it's like groundbreaking, cure, proves, that kind of sensationalistic, clickbaity language is a tip-off that maybe they're looking for people to engage with it rather than present factual information. And lastly, just see what other reputable websites say about it. In this case, you could look to see if there are some non-biased places that can comment on whether this is a reputable source or not. Any final thoughts on that before we move to the F of SIFT? No? Okay. The F is for find better coverage. So this is a particular topic that was covered, this particular study, and this is about the Daily Mail. So finding better coverage. What other coverage has this particular topic received? So in this particular case, Jennifer and Heather, what might you do to see, well, okay, this is one article. These things don't exist in a vacuum. Where might I also look for some articles about this particular study if they exist?
Great questions. One place to start would be the university's media team of where the journal article came from. So I know that, for instance, at the universities I've worked at, if an author is releasing a publication, it typically will go through the media department to try to promote it, to discuss it. There's a journalist who will write about it in a scientific and unbiased way as much as possible. So I would try to approach maybe the academic university route if possible. Again, not going to be perfect necessarily, but I think, Chris, I like what you've got on the screen, for instance, journals and websites that have things like neuroscience news, psychology post, things that have more of a slant towards science than a slant like I'm going to post daily news all the time, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dr. Brout?
I agree with that. I think when you see language, as you've put here, Chris, might and may, is a lot more believable than is or prove. So I think looking for that kind of language is helpful. But I would also caution people that just because it says neuroscience news or psychology today or what have you, that doesn't necessarily mean that the reporting is going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important to remember while you're looking for alternative sources.
Yeah, absolutely. Just take everything with a grain of salt until you know more. In this particular case, as was mentioned, this study that the Daily Mail said had found a cure was covered in other places, one of them being SciPost and Neuroscience News, which I was also not familiar with. And we can take a look at those articles here. The SciPost one says, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Misophonia may reflect deeper psychological realities. Still kind of sensationalistic. In my opinion, I think this kind of sounds like it's maybe trying to make people fearful. I'm maybe reading a lot into it, but this sounds like it's anxiety inducing, like only the tip of the iceberg. What else is there? But to the credit of this SciPost, which again, I was not familiar with, it does use uncertain language. Maybe it reflects deeper psychological realities. Okay, that's a little bit more reasonable. And Neuroscience News also was not originally familiar with it before this. Uses might. So it's not saying that we have definitely found a cure, but maybe it's a brain regulation disorder, which sounds a little bit more reasonable. Yep. Okay, let's go back to my slides. So if you do the same thing of assessing whether these two particular publications, SciPost and Neuroscience News, are reputable, you can also do the same kinds of things to see what other people have said about those. We won't go through all of that, but to the credit of Dr. Brout and Dr. Hansen, at least the titles of these publications indicate that they are geared towards science.
But I would add, Chris, if I could, if you could go back to the slide. One of the things I think that's really important when you're looking at sources. So here we have in SciPost, it was psychological. Here we have in Neuroscience News, a brain regulation disorder. And one of the questions we have about misophonia that we don't have the answer to, but we're always speculating about, is what is misophonia? What kind of a disorder is it? And I think even though we do have the consensus definition now, we all know that it's a disorder that doesn't belong in any particular discipline. It's not just one thing. It's a multidisciplinary disorder. So since that's the way at least most people are looking at it now, again, I think it's just good to be cautious that people, that publications are going to slant towards whatever their bent is.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. And I'm going to go off of the slides a little bit because that is such a good point that I didn't really actually cover. But we're at a point where, because misophonia is a complex disorder, the more we study it, the more we live with it, the more we talk about it, the more we realize it's contradictory. It has weird idiosyncrasies to it. A lot about it doesn't make any sense. And when we hear claims of treatment or claims of cures, or this particular person knows what causes misophonia and has a guaranteed cure for it, which we don't have any data on any of that, who the source is of those is very important. An audiologist will look at this and say it's an audiological issue. A psychologist will look at this and say it's a psychological issue. A behavioralist will look at this and say, oh, it's a behavioral issue. So people have their own conscious or unconscious biases based off of their expertise and their viewpoints that is also worth considering when we're looking at these claims, right? I see Heather shaking her head. Do you have something to add to that?
Nope, you're doing a good job, Chris. I agree.
Okay. If I go off the rails, let me know. Anything about this before we move on to tracing to the last letter of the SIFT method? And then we'll kind of do open discussion. This is the part that I think is fun. So the T in SIFT is trace it to the original context. The cool thing about this particular article is that it is about a specific research study. So we could always go to the original source. Let's actually look at that research study. These things are not, behind some kind of golden guard tower or anything like that. Most of these can be accessed by the public, and we don't always necessarily think of doing that. But for research studies, yeah, you can probably go and read them, even if you're not familiar with it. So this particular one was a study. I do have to mention that we helped fund this particular study that this was about. That's not directly relevant to why we're covering it. It's mainly that it was miscovered in the general press. But academic journals, you all are very familiar with, both of you. How do you go about finding if a particular academic journal, while we're looking to find that published paper, is reputable? We tend to think, oh, any scientific journal is going to be reputable. But there's kind of a broad spectrum there that you all are probably more familiar with than I am. So how do you look at a particular academic, a journal that publishes science papers and determine if it's reputable? What are some of the things that are kind of tip-offs of whether it is or isn't for you?
Well, it used to be a lot easier because back in the day, the journals were in a library on the stacks, and your university or your college kind of only bought the more reputable ones. Now we really have a problem of excess, and it is very difficult to tell. We also have different countries with different journals. So again, it is so much more difficult now than it was a long time ago. I think there are some journals that are pay for play. So you have, in other words, the authors get charged to publish. But having said that, a lot of reputable journals are now doing that. So interestingly, I can't think of, or if I didn't have prior knowledge, exactly how I would do this in today's atmosphere. I'm not really sure. And so I'm going to let Heather take it from here. But I also want to say a lot of these things are still behind paywalls. And that's very problematic. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that are open access and we can find them, but there's still a lot behind paywalls that are very difficult to get to.
Absolutely. That'll be a nice segue into, I think, our next slide, but I want to hear from Heather to see if you have anything on the same kind of thing that we did for the Daily Mail as far as determining whether it's reputable or not. We can't necessarily always trust that academic journals are completely reputable too.
Totally valid. And as you're saying this, Chris, this is a tough question. I don't have an immediate gut reaction because it's so one we wrestle with when we're trying to figure out where to publish an article at. But I think I will echo what Jennifer was saying about some journals being pay to play. And what that means is that there are subsets of journals that say, all right, as long as you give me money, authors, I'll publish your paper. And it's, I think the practical things to look out for, and this is maybe a little bit nuanced to folks who aren't used to this, might be to look at their turnaround time for their review process, because an article or a journal that is more pay to play is more likely to have a quicker review process, just kind of cycle them through as quick as possible so I can get as much published as I can and as much payment as I can. So I think a journal to me that is more reputable would be one in which there is a clearly delineated review process, one in which it is going to take time. Like I expect journal reviews to take months to, I mean, sometimes journals take up to a year to review your paper or more. So I think I would be wary of anything that has speed attached to it. And I'd be wary of things like Jennifer was saying that have just high costs for authors. But like, again, most journals now have article publication or processing fees. So that's not even a great system now anyway.
Right.
It's tough. Part of me is like, okay, maybe it's the duration, how old the journal is, how long it's been publishing for. Like, for instance, you have an image here. This is volume 116. That means it's been going for 116 years or issues or whatnot. But even that's hard because we have reputable journals now. Like, for instance, Imaging Neuroscience just started up, and that is just a couple years old. So you can't necessarily use that as a criterion either.
It's a challenge.
It is very challenging.
It's a challenge. And let's, just for the general public, because I didn't necessarily know all of these things, even though I went to grad school for theater, and we don't necessarily have, I mean, there's some peer review obviously there, but when it comes to science, the mathematics and the specificity of how science is undertaken, how it's proposed, how studies are designed, peer review, those are all things I don't know the general public is entirely familiar with. We don't have to go into the whole history of peer-reviewed journals, but for the sake of people like me who just, don't have a science background, what makes these kinds of the ideal process of peer review and how research studies are planned and undertaken and how there are control groups? And again, we don't have to do the whole thing. That would be a whole series of videos that we could do. But what is the goal in an ideal situation to make science transparent and trustworthy in a publication like this, before we get into how to find these articles and read them yourself?
These are great questions, Chris, and I'm happy to talk more about the actual research methodsy part, but I think how can we trust the transparency and whatnot of it is, I think, the part I want to attack first. Not attack, I want to address first, sorry.
Right.
And that is, there are a variety of things that researchers can do. So one thing that I would trust in an article more is if a researcher did what we call pre-registration, which is what you say ahead of time. You say, all right, I have this plan for this study. These are the specific analyses I am going to run. I'm going to run this one, and I'm going to run this one. And these are maybe my hypotheses of what I expect to find. And you go in ahead of time, before you've collected or before you've analyzed your data, saying, here is my plan. And that way, researchers can hold you to that when you publish your article, that you didn't just analyze 100 different things and then happen to find one that worked and then write your article about it. So it kind of holds the researcher accountable a bit to make that statement publicly ahead of time. So there are a variety of pre-registration sites now that accommodate that. But I think otherwise, as far as helping the general public understand the review process, these types of studies take years. Like oftentimes, for instance, my first Misophonia article I started in 2017 and it got published in 2021. The actual time that it takes to do your study in its whole, to go through writing it up in a way that is true and accurate and helpful. By the time you submit it to a journal, it's useful to know that you're submitting it directly to an editor and you are saying, dear editor, please publish my article here for these different reasons. And the editor of the journal has the ability to say, nope, not even going to try. Or they have the ability to say, all right, I'll give you a chance and I will send it to reviewers. So a lot of Misophonia articles, for instance, my first one got what we call desk rejected a bunch by that editor who said, we don't publish Misophonia in our journal, sorry. And it was hard to get Misophonia out there because of that kind of status. So you have to make it past the editor first. And then if the editor is willing to accommodate your article, they'll send it out to 2 to 3 reviewers who are experts in the field, typically anonymous. And these reviewers will take a close look through your article, often tearing it apart, asking you for more analyses, asking you to soften your claims, so many different things I have done to ultimately make my papers better. But it is an extensive review process, 2 to 3 times of revisions back and forth, before finally the reviewers say, all right, you satisfied all of my concerns, and the editor stamps it for approval. And so this is a long process, an arduous process. And I think that these are the types of things that I want to see in a journal, is one that has these review processes, because I think it's ultimately best for science.
Very well said. Dr. Brout?
That was great, Heather. I would just add to what Heather said that in the review process, where we are with misophonia is a little tricky. We're just now getting enough researchers so that we actually can have enough reviewers. So that's another problem when you start researching a quote new, which not really a new disorder, but a newly termed disorder. Who are the people that you're going to send out to review? I've never heard of misophonia. I can't review it. What are you talking about? So it's a slow build up before I think you start to see better and better quality over time.
Absolutely. And a few things that I didn't even know about until I started trying to understand this better myself is even at the very, very earliest stages, like Heather mentioned, that pre-registration is important, but there's always a team of people, and there will be kind of advisors who are senior researchers at a particular university who will be responsible ultimately for younger researchers' work if it's fresh. There's also a thing called an IRB, which I had never heard of, which is an institutional review board. And before any research happens at the academic level, this is, maybe you can explain what an IRB is, but this is a major step that is kind of the gatekeepers to you doing your study or not. Do you want to describe really quickly what an IRB is and why it's important early on in the study?
Sure. IRB is a group of a variety of people, both experts in your field, researchers, and members of the community. So a bunch of different viewpoints that get together and they read through your entire study plan. And it is a detailed study plan. So before you even collect any data at all, you have to say, dear IRB, I am going to do these exact things. This is all of the document my participant will ever see. These are all the things I would ever give or ask of them. And the IRB will go back and forth with you and say, no, that seems a little risky to me. We're not going to do it that way. And so even before you get to start your study, every study needs IRB approval. And to publish, you need to acknowledge that you got IRB approval ahead of time, or you're dead in the water. There's no way a journal would publish you otherwise. So yes, that is also a good reminder, Chris, that is a beginning step as well.
Absolutely. And you won't get any funding typically if it hasn't passed the IRB. Like even we have small research grants for students, but passing the IRB is the first step to, yes, we will start reviewing it, and then it's a process after that. So thank you so much for explaining that. There's just a lot of oversight in genuine science, and that's important. We could go on and on about that. But moving back to assessing this particular journal that this study was in, it's the British Journal of Psychology. I wasn't familiar with it. I guess probably were. But we can use the same process. What do other people say? What kind of history does it have? What kind of editorial standards does this particular peer-reviewed academic journal have? And this one is highly reputable, in my opinion. That's just the information that I found. It's been around for many, many years. It's a professional journal with a very highly respected organization overseeing it. It's a publication from the British Journal of, it's one of their psychological associations. High editorial standards, long history of academic community. So it has a large reputation. And the fact that this particular paper was published in it gives it a lot of credence as far as its trustability, right? Authority. That's the word I'm looking for. Thanks for the help. So you can assess all these kind of publications that way and get an idea. Again, none of these particular steps are going to say, yes, this is definitely reputable. Yes, this is not. But you can start to get a picture based off of what other reputable sources say and what kinds of editorial standards they have. And you can decide for yourself whether you think it's reputable or not. So already mentioned paywalls. This is a classic issue that we always run into, but is getting a little bit better. All of these academic journals cost a lot of money to subscribe to, a lot of money to submit to and get published, and a lot of money to read even the journals or the research papers. But that's getting a little bit better. Especially in the misophonia community, more and more I find that having the research papers be open access, which means you don't have to pay to read the article, is a great thing, a great movement that we have to help with, but not all of them are that way. And a couple of tricks that I use, and maybe you all have some advice as well. If something is behind a paywall, before you decide to even pay for it, go through a few different avenues. One, you could always email the researchers themselves.
Yeah.
It'll say who the researchers are, find out what university they're with. The paper will usually tell you, oh, they're at the University of Warsaw. They're at University of Texas, Austin. Find their email them. Most of the time, researchers will be delighted to send you a copy of this study and be happy that you're interested for free. That's one way. Ask your local librarian, whether you're at a university. Obviously, you can ask your university library, but public libraries, and especially in larger metropolitan areas, pay the large amounts of money to have access to these publications, and librarians are especially resourceful. So ask your local librarian if they can access this before you pay for it. Any other things you have to say on paywalls versus not paywalls?
I think that's
yeah, you go, Jennifer, and then I'll add.
it's a great idea to email the researchers, and the emails are usually on the paper now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to add. So
Yeah.
every paper has what's called a corresponding author, and that corresponding author, typically the first or the last, is required to put their email address in the publication. So you shouldn't have to look too far to find who it is, which is really nice. But as a researcher who's gotten asked plenty of times, please ask me. I would much rather have you ask me than pay for a thing. There's also sites, for instance, called researchgate.com. ResearchGate is also a platform that kind of houses a lot of research articles, and they have a direct button that says email researcher, ask for copy. So I've gotten a variety of emails or kind of notifications that say, hey, so-and-so at ResearchGate wants to read your paper. And I just click a button and I'm like, go. So please seek out those avenues before, please do not pay for these articles.
Right, absolutely. And there's lots of creative ways around that. So since we have a little bit more time, I think we have just enough time to go over what so far we've learned about this particular paper and the headlines. Having worked in newspapers myself, I know that the people who write the headlines are actually different than the people who write the articles. So there's journalists who will write sometimes pretty reasonable articles about something, and then there's some other person who just is trying to get the thing to the printer or published and just has to write a clever headline for it, and they may not have any idea of what it's about. And so headlines sometimes are a lot crazier than the articles themselves. But the British Journal of Psychology, the paper that was actually published, never mentions the cure. You can actually, when you find the paper, which we'll take a look at in a second, do a find of the word cure. It's nowhere in there. Some other things to consider about the paper that is worth mentioning is the size of the sample. The sample size is the number of participants that were in this study. And so in this particular study, it was 149, which is not a small study, but it's not a particularly large one. So that is kind of a tip-off that this is preliminary, but not definitive. Not that these things are ever really completely definitive, and that's another story. But conclusions are cautious and call for more research. Nothing is ever really proven or settled in this particular case. Some things to keep in mind that, again, I've learned just as a person in the general public, anytime a newspaper article says recent study, that's just one study. And there's really, maybe you all can talk a little bit more about this, but there's not really a case where one study just changes everything and proves or disproves something. It takes repeated studies by different labs, under different circumstances with different funding in different places to start seeing trends. And then we could start drawing some conclusions to things, but it might take many, 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 many studies to start noticing those trends. And one particular study is never really going to prove or disprove anything in this case. So that helps us question this as well. Do you all have any comments on that before we take a look at the actual paper and then maybe answer some questions?
Just that, again, we are somewhat at the beginning stages. So we're seeing a little replication, but not a lot. So really anything that you're reading in misophonia at this point needs to be repeated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I echo you, Chris, that sample size is definitely one of the first things that I would look at if you're investigating a claim. And it's one of the easiest ones from a lay audience to open up, because every paper, and I think you've had this on a previous slide, like has really clear, typically subsections, one of which is methods, and under methods is always a participant section. And I think as long as you can glean that the participant wasn't every human being that's ever existed in every country of every age, you know that we are limited in what we're finding right there. We're limited in age, we're limited in geographic location, we're limited in ethnicity makeup, whatever it is. I'm guilty of that too. We're all guilty of that. We're all doing the research on the people we have available to us. But I would not then extrapolate that information to the broader, we've cured everyone type of finding. And that is, as you mentioned, replication here. Not until we get something like a meta-analysis, which takes a bunch of papers that have done the same thing and then figures out the commonalities and gets kind of the patterns from it, that's when I would start to be able to trust what's going on.
Absolutely. And something that I didn't know early on that I also take into consideration is there are things called case studies. And I know people in science know exactly what I'm talking about. I did not. A case study is a scientific paper with a sample set of one person. So it's a whole research paper about one person's experience. And that can be kind of interesting, but what one person experiences is really almost impossible to draw any conclusions from, would you say?
Well, absolutely. You may not be able to draw broader conclusions, but I do think there are some case studies that we can learn from. Mm-hmm. So, but when you see case study, definitely at least know this is just one, sometimes 2, 3 people, very small.
One, maybe 2 or 3 people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, but that's also how misophonia research has been built, because when you start with case studies, that's all you have. So, but I think we're pretty much out of that stage now.
Mm-hmm. And it can be kind of interesting because a case study might just be the first dipping our toe into a particular topic that has never been covered before to see if there's something there, maybe. Or there's also, again, you all know this, but pilot studies, which are slightly larger studies mm-hmm. than maybe 10 or 20 people. And that's also a good way to maybe prove that there's a reason to have a larger study, which, again, I didn't know and is helpful to assess a paper. So we're actually looking at the original paper that the Cure article is about. This is Misophonia symptom severity is linked to impaired flexibility. And mainly what we're looking at here is to make reading scientific papers less intimidating. Not everybody probably thinks, oh, I would love to read academic papers, and because they're, impossible to understand, but they're not impossible to understand. And when as a person I'm not a mathematician or researcher or anything, if you could find the actual paper through the methods that we talked about, emailing the researchers and everything, honestly, you can read every paper at the beginning is going to have what's called an abstract. This is just kind of a layperson's summary of what the paper is about. You can read just that alone and get a pretty good idea of why they tested what they tested and what they found.
Chris, before you click away or scroll too far, just wanted to point out the little email icon next to Mercedes Yerfanian's name as a demonstration
yes.
of how you could easily just contact this person. If you didn't have access to this article, click that button and email and ask.
Bingo. Absolutely. Great point. And what are some of the things that we notice here that you might want to point out for somebody who's never looked at an actual academic research paper before and maybe a little intimidated to jump in before we move on to some of the other sections that are easy to understand? Anything of note? The email thing is a great call out.
There are a couple different things I would look at. So besides, I think typically maybe the down arrow key on the authors will show you what university it comes out of. I would look at what data was published, and maybe if the journal provides it, what data was submitted, to get you a sense of how long that paper was reviewed for. And again, as a general rule of thumb, would want something to be reviewed pretty, thoroughly before I am confident in the findings. But other than that, I don't immediately have additional things to add.
Dr. Brout, anything?
Well, one thing I always do before I read an article, and this is probably will seem backwards, I go down to the references. And if I see 8 references and not 50, there are 71 published articles this year, 2025. I want to see a lot of references. And if I see references that are only in psych and they're not in neuroscience, or they're only in auditory, and that tells me that for me is a big thing to tell
Great
me
point.
how much has this person have these people really read the scope of the research? How much have they really integrated the research that we have so far? Or, are they just kind of doing their thing from their perspective? So the references, which are at the end and very easy to skip over, just kind of look at the number of them. And if you see just a few, that's never a great sign.
And there's also a link to the references at the top, which I find maybe a lot of people use Jennifer's strategy. You'll notice figures, references, related information. It'll jump you straight there so you can get a kind of sense of how many and what there are.
Good point. I hadn't noticed that. I learned something new. One thing I also look at is the date. Just as a layperson, I know that Misophonia research is brand new, and you will find some papers from 2013, 2014. And that's kind of a giveaway to me that this is based off of very rudimentary, speculation. And we didn't know pretty much anything about misophonia. We still don't know a whole lot, but we knew literally almost nothing 2014, 2015. And so if it's kind of more than 3 or 4 or 5 years old, I think this is not going to be nearly as well supported as more recent papers would be, perhaps.
I agree with that. I just want to add, when you look at the title here, misophonia symptom severity is linked to impaired flexibility and heightened rumination. I would like the rest of the title to say, in an experiment that used this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
I like when right away from the title, it's too all-encompassing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in fact, the things we've already talked about certainty versus uncertainty in the headlines can apply here. This headline could be interpreted as saying something with a bit more certainty than maybe it really is. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah.
I agree. It comes across that way.
Yeah.
Great points. Okay, for me, when I'm reading these, I tend to read the background, but not everybody has to. This just explains what they are studying and why they decided to undertake this particular research topic. For me, if I'm just reading a research paper, I tend to skip most of I'll come back to it, but most of the number crunching. There'll always be, what percentage of their sample population experienced X, Y, and Z, and they'll do a lot of data analysis. I tend to skip, like you said, all the way to the bottom, right above the references. There are a few things that, other than reading the abstract at the beginning, the last couple of sections of pretty much any research paper, for me, will give me a great, quick idea of the study. This is a long paper. It's a lot of numbers. Like all of this, if you're not a math person, you can technically just kind of glance at it and think, oh, okay. All of that will be explained down here in what is usually called discussion or conclusions. And this is, what did we find? And it's usually pretty easy to understand, even if it's a fairly technical topic, in my opinion. What would you all say?
Absolutely. First paragraph of that discussion, the whole role of that paragraph is to remind the reader in lay terms what my research question was and what my key findings were. So I definitely I think starting there after the abstract was a good call.
Bingo. Dr. Brout?
I think, when you're dealing with statistics, there's a few things that is important for people to know. So first of all, you have qualitative studies or quantitative. So quantitative use data and statistics, what you're seeing here. Qualitative is different. I mean, the qualitative method is more about interviewing and finding common themes in what people say. It's more hypothesis generating than it is hypothesis testing. I love qualitative research.
That's a great point.
So that's one thing to look for. And that really is where you get closer to lived experience. When you're dealing with stats, you have descriptive and predictive. So the descriptive will just describe to you, this is the average number of people who said this. This is the median, or another form of an average number of people who felt this way. So that's just describing the data. And then you have predictive, and predictive is based on probability, not certainty. So one thing we always want to think about is statistics can be very misleading. So if you have difficulty reading these sections, do not feel bad, because things have gotten more and more complicated in the last 30 years. And a lot of it is, at the end of the day, it's just statistics. It's not the end all be all. Heather, you may feel completely differently about that.
I'm a quantitative stats girly. We can agree to disagree. No, but I think both are totally have relevance and validity in this type of work. It's interesting where our skill sets diverge a bit.
Absolutely. And this particular paper has the conclusion. It's one paragraph. So if you don't have much time and you're able to find the actual research paper, reading the abstract at the beginning, the first couple of paragraphs of the discussion, if there is one, and the conclusion, that's literally 2 or 3 minutes worth of reading, and you could pretty much get most of everything you need to know about the specifics of this study. Some other things that tend to come up, I thought this paper had one. Oh, here it is. A lot of papers will have limitations, or limitations in future directions, and the limitations is kind of cool in my opinion. It says, when we were doing this study, there were some things that we probably could have done differently in hindsight. Or if somebody wanted to do this study themselves, we might recommend some things that we learned along the way that kind of, could be improved upon, right? Which I think is kind of a cool thing to come out and admit. And most papers that I've seen will have looking back, we didn't have a sample set that was had a lot of variety, or we didn't do this particular thing. And it's a nice way of being transparent. But do you all have anything that you would add as far as what limitations and conflicts of interest and everything come up in papers?
I echo you, Chris. I like that there's a limitation section. I think when authors can be straightforward and honest with, like, yeah, man, I acknowledge this paper's not perfect. There, like you said, sample size, demographics, there are better ways I could have done this, I think is a really respectful way that an author can show they're not trying to sensationalize their work or, make conclusions where they don't have the data to support it. And I agree with you, Chris. You mentioned conflict of interest. Acknowledgement section will help you out there a little bit. Typically, there might be like a conflict of interest statement, that type of thing, where a researcher says, like, I was not paid by any for-profit company to make these results look a particular way, for instance. It's rare that has happened, but I think it's good to look for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will see that. I don't see it a whole lot, but if a particular researcher is researching, let's say, a particular disease or disorder, and that researcher also is a consultant for a pharmaceutical company that makes a medication for that particular disease, that's a big conflict of interest that they would almost certainly have to spell out, just so you know, I may be biased even unconsciously in our conclusions or something like that.
I think also, just to add to that, one thing at this stage of the research to think about is that we're still trying to figure out how to measure misophonia. So there is not one great scale for misophonia. it's great that there are several ones being developed, but it's kind of messy right now. And that really affects the research at this stage. So just in general, the research is inherently a little bit messy at this beginning stage because we don't have 40 years behind us of, well, this particular test of misophonia definitely is valid. It definitely is testing what it says to be testing. And it predicts people will have misophonia or people won't. So we don't have that yet. So again, everything is still a little bit messy.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. I also noticed one other thing, Chris, that you're on this page for. Scrolling a little bit farther down, you have a data availability section, which I think is also a thing the field is moving towards now, which is really cool. And that is saying, hey, I've made all of my data available. So if you want to check me on it, if you want to look at it yourself, by all means, do it, which I think is a really cool thing that a lot of journals are requiring nowadays, but a lot that kind of gives you a little bit more confidence in that these authors are not just cherry picking certain things, or they're not massaging their data to look the way they want it to look, because they're saying you can look at it too. So that's also a cool thing to look for in journal articles.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, as somebody who, even though I have been in academia, I wasn't on the scientific standpoint, knowing that, oh, I can read these. I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a psychologist, but I can read a couple of sections on pretty much any paper and really understand it in an easy way and find out if that headline about a cure is even mentioned anywhere in this paper. And nothing even remotely like that is mentioned in this paper, just based off of 2 or 3 paragraphs. Any final thoughts? If anybody in the audience has questions, there should be a Q&A option. Is there not? Oh, maybe I was wrong about the Q&A part. Oh, it's an experiment. Well, if you have any questions, you're welcome to email us. How about that? maybe we'll test the Google Meet features that are new in the future as well. So, do you all have any final thoughts on this topic? It's almost a daily thing, or every couple of days, where something is mentioned in some online forum about misophonia, or an article in a particular paper, or a social media post comes up that it says all kinds of things about misophonia. And what do we know and what don't we know about misophonia at this point? I think having that as a simple basis of, we really know very little about it. And so just knowing what we do know and don't know about it in general can help you determine if what these things are saying is true. Do you all have anything kind of to comment on that, just to wrap up? That was a big, open-ended, vague question.
That was a very big question. I think we know that there are brain differences between people with misophonia and people who do not have misophonia. We have to see a lot of replication in terms of what those differences are, but at least we have enough research now that we can say that. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, Heather. I think we can say it involves the auditory system, the visual system, the sympathetic nervous system, very clearly. I think we cannot say it's a psychological disorder. We cannot say it's an auditory disorder. We can only say it's a disorder that really involves many, many different processes, many different fields of research.
Absolutely. Heather?
My first instinct to answer that question, Chris, is a plug for y'all, honestly. It's that what we know right now is pretty well aggregated and unbiasedly presented on So Quiet's website. Like, I think you guys do a great job of aggregating sources as they come out, of doing things like science sessions that allow the presenter, the author, to directly talk about the work. So one of the ways that I would tell what we know and what we don't know is what y'all have covered. I don't know. That seems like a weird plug. I promise they're not
No,
paying
I
me
think
to
that's
say
great.
that, but, like,
I
yeah.
Did you post the link to the master list page? One of the things that Michelle, my wife, a librarian, manages on our website is what we've been working on for years, which is the master list of links to Misophonia research. So pretty much every research paper, dissertation, anything that's scientifically based that we can link to that is about misophonia or is tangentially related to misophonia from a research standpoint, we've put a link to it on this one particular just crazy list of everything that we can find. So that's one place to start. In general, especially in online forums like Facebook groups and so forth, there's a lot of claims. Even if you don't know what they're saying or anything like that, right now we are working on treatments, and tell me if I get this right, not necessarily treatments for misophonia, but treatments to help us manage misophonia. Is that an accurate way of saying kind of where we are with research around reducing the impact of misophonia? Is that would you say that's kind of where we're at with research and we don't have anything that's proven, but things are showing some promise in that regard?
I would agree with that. I think we are still, one of the problems is that interventions tend to either be audiological or psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary interventions yet. So I think because of that, it's somewhat limited. When you talk about a psychological intervention at this point, you're really talking about a psychosocial intervention. And when you talk about the audiological, we're still kind of looking at Jastroboff's original audiological interventions. And I think, yes, there are a lot of things out there that can help you cope. But in terms of if you're looking really to reduce, when we say reduce symptoms of a disorder, what does that mean? Does that mean you have fewer triggers? Does that mean you are less physiologically reactive? Or does that mean that you are coping better in your life? And I think the smaller the claim, so this is to help you cope better with your misophonia, at this point is really where we're at.
Absolutely. Thank you for explaining that. And the reason I brought it up as we're wrapping up is when we see online an article, again, or whatever source it is, social media, somebody says, oh, I know what causes misophonia. Well, nobody really knows that. And just knowing that we don't have any kind of reliable data on that yet helps you assess that claim without even looking at anything. We don't have yet any kind of nutritional supplements that have been proven to be helpful in scientific data to help with misophonia. So when you see claims about that, you can go, I'm not saying that this person is lying or anything like that, but we don't have any published peer-reviewed research to suggest those kinds of things. And just knowing generally what we know and we don't know about misophonia can help you brush something off or look more into it on your own terms, right?
Absolutely. I think you have to be very careful. We see this in every disorder, every disease. I'm sure all of you see it beyond misophonia, before misophonia, that there are always going to be people out there who are unfortunately exploiting suffering. And you do have to be really careful about that. And I think it was Zach Rosenthal who said the broader the claim, the more suspicious you should be. So I think that's a good way to sort of look at it.
Yeah, I think maybe that's ultimately sort of the point I was getting at, which is a lot of people with misophonia are suffering daily and want relief. Understandably, we've all been there. And so knowing that it's kind of the Wild West now, that there are outlandish claims to prey upon that, genuinely or not, some people legitimately think they know what causes it, but we just don't have any data to support it. Just be kind of skeptical and choose wisely what you decide to try out and be clear about it with your practitioner, I guess, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, and I think also there's a general consensus that there likely will not be just one treatment for misophonia.
Right.
There are going to be different treatments for potentially different subtypes. And so again, if you see the one treatment, the cure.
Everybody's different. What works
Right.
for one person may be another person just gets the side effects and doesn't help them at all. So just use it with a grain of salt. So sorry we didn't have the Q&A working. That was somebody found it. Oh wait, we have a question before we wrap up.
No, they just said, hey, I found it. But...
Oh, somebody tested it out. Well, thanks for testing it out. Feel free to email us any questions you have after this at any time. Heather and Jennifer are two of our key advisors on all things scientific when it comes to misophonia. So bottom line on the Daily Mail article. Thanks, James. That's a great question. I can't, I'm not going to say it is or it isn't.
I'll say
but
it is. Yes.
It's very questionable. I did not know this. The Daily Mail is kind of like a tabloid, apparently. This is just my assessment. And that was a completely outlandish headline. Yeah. No thing like a cure whatsoever is mentioned in the paper. Ultimately, not even a suggestion of a known treatment is mentioned of any kind. Just some potential things to look into in other studies in the future is what the paper actually said. So that UK Daily Mail article, not a great source. Although to their credit, they did include some of the actual diagrams from the paper, and the article, more than the headline, is a little bit better than the headline. Yeah. That's just my take on it. Great question. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for going over time. Thank you both so much. Anything in closing before we wrap up on the topic of just assessing claims and understanding science better for the general population?
Be skeptical. Like, I know we all want solutions, but be skeptical. Email us if you have questions. Email the authors if you have questions.
Mm-hmm. And ask professionals. If you have a clinician who says, I think you should try this medication or this particular treatment or anything, like, why? What makes you think that? Maybe they have a good reason, maybe they don't. It's up to you to determine what is going to be best for your well-being in the end. All right. Well, thank you both. What? Oh, there's a hand raised. Robert, I don't know how to get somebody to talk if they've raised their hand. Things are going crazy. I'll tell you what, Robert, if you want to email us your question, we'll get you an answer after this. Is that cool? All right. Dr. Brout, Dr. Hansen, thank you so much for your time. Hope you all have a great Thanksgiving and all that good stuff. This has been a pleasure. We'll have to do this more often, I think.
Yeah.